Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good, good. Let me pause the record. All right. So thank you all for attending this, my first virtual online session. Just to give you a little background on how this came about. As you know, I've come around and I've met with most of you. During that time when we were doing the needs assessment, what I found is that a lot of our ESCs were supporting schools who were implementing PACS. During that needs assessment, I had the opportunity to meet Laura, and I found out that she was a guru in PACS, and that Laura was at that point, and had been working on a project to align PACS with PBIS. So I thought this was a perfect opportunity for us to sit down and really understand how PACS can strengthen in any school's PBIS implementation. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen with, I'm going to turn it over to Laura, and I'm
all right.
her the opportunity. I don't want to share my screen. I want to give her the host. I'm going to let her be a host. Give me a second, because as I said, this is also my opportunity to kind of work this out. All right, so manage participants, and I'm going to make Laura the host of this video. Yes.
All right. I am the host now, so I should be able to share.
If everyone else can go ahead and mute their microphones, that would be very helpful.
Okay. So I don't know how you have it set up, if you can see me or not, but it's kind of nice to at least see a couple people for me, so then I can kind of, if you have a question or something, if I don't see you, then wave at Brandy or something so that I could stop and do that. So, because I can just see a few people on the side here. Yeah, as Brandy said, I've been working on this for quite a while. I'll kind of get into how that all happened in a minute. I'll introduce myself. I work at the Northwest Ohio Educational Service Center. Things have really evolved over the last 6 years. In a nutshell, right now, I'm doing PBIS training and coaching for our school districts. I'm also PACS partnering and coordinating PACS. And on the side, I'm a PACS trainer, and also train in understanding trauma and managing it in the schools, which is really my main passion, and the other things kind of stem from that. Our ESC covers 4 counties: Williams, Henry, Defiance, and Fulton, and there are 23 school districts in it. Right now, I'm currently actively involved with 18 of those districts. And the other ones are either kind of doing their own thing or not interested in doing anything at all. So eventually I hope to reach out to them. But as you can imagine, 18 school districts is quite a bit when you're talking PACS and PBIS both. But that being said, they're all relatively small districts because we're mostly a rural area. But it's a lot of driving. So just to kind of give you a background and the rationale for where this stuff comes from. Once upon a time, I was a teacher, mostly in junior high and high school. Did that for several years, and then when we moved to Ohio, I had a small baby and ended up having twins within 2 years. So I had 3 kids in less than 2 years. So teaching high school full-time wasn't really something I was able to do because my husband worked many, many hours a week. So I ended up getting a job at Northwest State Community College, which is literally in the middle of nowhere cornfields to accommodate all 4 counties. Taught composition there for about 8 years, part-time. And what I was really realizing is that these students were completely unengaged in learning. The straight out of high school kids weren't so bad because most of them are going to community college as a gateway to university. But a large percentage of them were in their 20s and 30s as adults. I would sometimes start with 24 students, end up with 2 actually passing a class. started getting really depressed about that. My own son started checking out on learning as well. And so I started doing, I have a psychology background to begin with. So I started doing a lot of research into what makes people check out from learning. And that led me to this whole issue of trauma and how that can so greatly affect us both physically and emotionally, and how that affects us, especially when we're in a school setting. So with that background, I was kind of done grading really bad essays. So at that same time, Safe Schools, Healthy Students at the RESC, can you see my cursor as I'm going around? Okay. RESC got a Safe Schools, Healthy Students grant, which was really focusing on exactly that, how to make schools safe and students healthy so that they would be able to learn. So I just jumped at the opportunity. I received that job to be part of that team. Long story short, the two things I was supposed to focus on were Pax and PBIS. And at that time, I wasn't really training in them or anything because I didn't really know much about them myself, but I was setting up trainings more of an administrative perspective for the school districts and then sitting in on these trainings. So I sat in on more Pax and PBIS trainings than I could shake a stick at. And then, of course, learning a lot from that. So then eventually my job became to implement Pax mostly in the schools, and PBIS was kind of left up to the SSTs. And then when that grant ended in the one county, then our ESC asked if I could start doing Pax in the whole 4-county area where that they service. So at that point, I had tons of schools interested in Pax, and a lot of them wanted to go school-wide. I started learning more and more about PBIS, and then I became a PBIS trainer. Paxis actually paid for me to become a PBIS trainer to start working on this project. And then eventually House Bill 318 passed on the PBIS training to the ESCs as well, so now it's kind of combined. So, but a lot of my PBIS interest started really happening when the Pax schools were saying, hey, we want to go school-wide. And I started saying, well, that doesn't really make much sense unless you start doing it through PBIS. And so that kind of merged together. So as you can imagine, everything was unicorns and rainbows through this whole process. And I would say that is not at all the case. We learned a lot of tough lessons, especially the first couple of years in Williams County where we tried a lot of stuff. One of the biggest things I learned is you just can't come trompsing into a school and say, hey, I got a bunch of acronyms to throw at you because it's going to save your life and make your teaching way better. And the response I had with that approach was, would you like some ice picks and daggers into you or something like that? Teachers were so fed up with acronyms and stuff. They were asked to do Pax, and then they're asked to do PBIS, and they barely knew Pax, so all they saw it as was really pretty much, okay, so this team has to invent a bicycle and you do it in French, and then this team over here, teachers, while you're teaching full-time, you have to invent a bike in Danish and use just the Danish language, and then you're going to have the whole school learn to ride the bike, but they have to speak German when they're doing it. And so that's just what it felt like to them. And every time I use that analogy, the teachers would just laugh, and they're like, that's exactly what we feel like. Because there were so many things being thrown at them. And it just wasn't happening. So they hated everything. There were some teachers who wanted to dive in, but they just were exhausted trying to get it all to work. So my mission really became about the teachers more than the students, to really include the teachers and the entire staff in some trauma-informed way to try to reduce the sanity. So kind of like when you get on the airplane, which we used to do back in the day once in a while, and you're supposed to put your own oxygen mask on first before you put your kids on. That kind of became my model, as I got to put the oxygen mask on the teachers first before they can do it for the students. And so I started trying to think of how we could do this trauma-informed thing and how we could do PBIS and Pax in a way that made sense for the teachers, so that they could make sense for the students. And then this is how I knew something was really wrong. These are actual quotes that I had several years ago. I had a superintendent who said, I do not want my school to waste time on PBIS. There's too many hours out of the classroom for the training. Costs too much money. Even those who are gone through the training, they're not doing it anyways, and nobody's policing it, and it's gonna go away. So for him, all PBIS meant was a lot of time and money and no purpose. And that made me quite shocked, quite frankly, because PBIS was not anything having to do with the well-being of anybody. It was just a money sucker for him. And then a principal said to me, well, let's do PAX in grades pre-K through 2, then we'll do PBIS with grades 3 through 5, and then grades 6 through 12, we'll do the R factor, focus 3. Again, if you know anything about PBIS, you realize that PBIS is supposed to be the deciding factor in the overall framework on all of that, not separate from any of that. So that principal obviously did not understand that PBIS was not just its own little program all by itself. Then on the flip side, I had some schools that really did understand it. Their teachers worked so hard in creating the framework, the matrix, the lesson plans, and all that kind of stuff. They were ready to implement, and the principal's like, you know what, I don't want to force anybody to do this. So if individual teacher wants to do PBIS, they can do it, but I'm not going to make everybody do it. Again, not understanding it was a school-wide thing. It's just, hey, if you want to do it, you can do it. And to even bring that a little further, I have a friend who's doing her master's degree with PBIS, and her professor at a college where she's getting her master's degree has told her she wants her to write her thesis on PBIS in the classroom only. So this is a professor of a master's degree program thinking that PBIS can be strictly in the classroom if the rest of the school isn't doing it, and forcing my friend to write her thesis on PBIS only in the classroom. She's not giving her a choice. So pretty crazy stuff going on. I had another principal ask me if, you know, because we had been doing PBIS for a while, he said, well, I really want to start doing Leader in Me. Is there a way we could tie PBIS into Leader in Me? So seeing PBIS as a separate thing from Leader in Me, again, not really understanding it as being the framework that would hold up Leader in Me versus the other way around. So anyways, all this crazy stuff going around, and I thought, okay, something's wrong here. We're not getting the point across. So I really sat down and worked through a lot of thoughts and stuff, and I wrote them down in this paper, which Brandy has access to give to you. A lot of the story that I just told you, the background, and then I took all of the modules that we use in Ohio for training and integrated PAX into there. So like when you're doing that module, this is how you could use PAX so that you are using PAX while you're training PBIS, and using PAX to have them incorporate PAX as you're building PBIS, as opposed to building PBIS and then saying, where can we fit PAX in? So that's the approach I take for the most part, because most of our schools didn't have any PBIS framework, and most of them were coming from the perspective that they wanted to use PAX. So that's the background, the rationale. I'm very PAX heavy on this because PAX was what was first in my job and in our schools, and they wanted to go school-wide. So PBIS was what we're using, is what we're using to go school-wide. I do have a few situations now where they don't know anything about PAX and we're starting PBIS, but I want that to make that clear, because some people hear me talk about this and thinking that the only way you can do PBIS is if you're using PAX, and that's not at all the case. It's just the case that with most of the schools I'm working with, they want PAX to be a huge part of their PBIS, and I'm helping them integrate it, just to make that clear. One of the first things to avoid this stress is to help schools just really, really understand what PBIS actually is. So what I tried to do, I'm getting my clock here so I can see my time. What I do is I just ask these questions. I said, forget about the laws, forget about regulations, forget about EMIS and all that stuff, and let's just ask these questions. What would happen if the adults worked together for a common vision? What would happen if the adults had common expectations for the students all the way through the school? What would happen if the students understood those common expectations and they knew how to behave and act socially because someone actually showed them how to? What would happen if more effort was spent on encouraging kids when they did something right and pro-social than when they messed up? What would happen when they did mess up that all the adults knew exactly what to do and when and how to call in the troops for help instead of sitting there and floundering around? What would happen if behavior issues dropped, academics went up, and teacher retention and satisfaction went up? And what would happen if decisions just weren't made on the fly or by gut reaction or whenever the newest thing or newest administrator came along, but decisions were made because a team spent time looking at data and facts and listening to their staff? Now, you can imagine that if you're throwing these questions at a group of educators, there's a lot of head nodding. They're like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I like that idea. And I'm like, well, that's really what PBIS is about. So if you think about it in those terms, it's something that you want to do, not something you have to do. And that really helps change perspective and has an open mind. Gets their open mind a little bit. And how this is all relating to PAX, you'll see in a little bit. Okay, so if PBIS is all about adult behavior, that's what we keep telling them. Adults create the environments that help students succeed. Over and over again, I think that's one of the most important sentences in PBIS training. If you can't change adult behavior, forget about trying to change the kids' behavior. And that's nice, but remember this, we've got a lot of stressed out adults, so it's pretty hard to ask them to change their behavior when they can hardly function with some of their requirements and their own lives to begin with, and let alone what's going on with their students. So I asked them to look at their, I call their acronym soup. So you've seen this slide. It's from our PBIS training. Brandy, I can assume that everybody is a PBIS person here, right? Okay. So this slide is kind of an indication that our PBIS framework looks at everything that a school is doing and tries to figure out how it works together. What I've discovered in the schools I'm working with, now I know this is not universal because culture is different everywhere. Again, working with the schools that are already doing PAX, when we sit down and look at it and use this work smarter, not harder exercise that's part of our PBIS training, they're like, wow, we're doing a lot of things. And then I ask them to talk about, who's on that team, what's the purpose and the strategic goal, what's the measurable outcome. And that's really funny because a lot of times they'll say, what do you mean by the measurable outcome? Well, we aren't really measuring anything. I'm like, bingo. So how do you know if it's working? I have no idea. Who's your target group? Well, what do you mean by that? We're not really, we're just targeting the whole school. It's really eye-opening for them to go through this process. And so, excuse me, what's happened is when schools go through this process, the ones that are doing PAX, they're realizing that one tool really does a lot of the stuff that all of these things have been trying to do, but they can't do all of these things in their full glory. They're just not enough time, people, and they overlap so much that it's kind of frustrating, and they all use different terms and languages. So what we're trying to do in this exercise is get them to narrow it down as much as possible to one tool and see how they intertwine together. Now, in this situation, you can look at the data and the research from PAX and see that it is a tool that addresses all of these things. So I took all of these things right out from underneath this umbrella and listed them here, okay? In one way or another, PAX does all of these things. It's trauma-informed, like more than you can possibly imagine. It helps prevent bullying, loaded with social emotional learning. The data shows absentee reduction. It can be used for restorative practices. It definitely de-escalates things. The long-term data shows that there's like a 60% reduction in substance abuse when kids have had PAX 1 year and they're now in their 20s and nearing upon their 30s. And it's been cross-studied in various different places and different things. PAX Tools is actually a break-off from PAX for the family, and it works with all these things. So let's make life simpler, and let's just start with PAX and use it as our tool to address all of this. We can see how they intertwine through this process here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take data to see if we're improving in our goals. And if some of this stuff isn't happening through PAX, our data is going to show it. And then we can go back to a very specific program and take something from one of those programs to fill in the gaps that PAX doesn't have, because it's bound to happen that PAX isn't going to fully take care of all of that. Does that make sense? Any questions so far? Okay, so I also have some schools more and more coming up that they have nothing. They're like, they don't have PAX, they don't have anything, they know they have to have PBIS, what in the world are we supposed to do? But I took those things and I put them very faintly on here because these schools faintly understand that they need to do some of this stuff, but they have no idea where to begin. So I introduced them to PAX as a possibility. And a lot of times, especially with the older grades, they're not too sure because the reputation is for little kids, but actually, the more and more they're seeing and understanding about PAX, I have several schools right now who are interested in PAX for junior high and high school as well, because they're seeing the data, they're seeing, and I taught junior high and high school most of my career, so I immediately can see the connections and help them with that. So what I do is kind of the same process. I show them how a lot of this stuff can start with PAX as their tool. And let's start with PAX, and then as time progresses, your data is going to show what other needs are coming up that PAX isn't addressing, and then we can start picking other programs and stuff to fill in those gaps. But you want to pick one tool to get started with to make things a lot simpler that can cover as much as possible. So two different situations I showed you: schools that started with PAX and said we want to go school-wide, and schools that have to do PBIS, don't really have a clue, so they're going to take PAX from the beginning and see what they can do with it. So when we look at our Ohio PBIS requirements, you're all familiar with those, but I'll just give you a couple seconds to rethink through them. So that's PBIS as we know it in Ohio. Well, what's PAX? Okay, well, let's think about this question here first. This is a quote from our PBIS training. We can't make kids learn or behave, but we do have the power to increase the likelihood by creating a positive environment and teaching behavior. Okay, so that sounds great. But you're asking a bunch of people who are full-time teachers, grading papers, coaching, have their own kids, working on their own higher education degrees, yada, yada, yada. They're not behavior specialists or school environment specialists. So we're asking them to suddenly create that. Really, PBIS does not want them to suddenly create it. PBIS is asking them to use evidence-based practices to help them do this stuff. So what tools can you use? And then that's how you can explain what PAX is with PBIS. PAX GBG, which is Good Behavior Game, is a tool that we have that will increase the likelihood of a positive environment, and it's a tool to be able to teach behavior. Okay, so if this is what we have to do as part of PBIS, here is a tool how you can use it. Ready-made, packaged, training, trauma-informed, researched. In fact, it's actually one of the only things that can say it is truly research-based. which is different than based on research. Based on research means that somebody put together some strategies, and the strategies are based on some research, but the whole package together has not been researched as a package for outcomes. PAX is one of the only tools within the school that you could say that about. PAX has been researched through Johns Hopkins and through PAX's itself, but also outside of PAX's through Johns Hopkins, through Penn State, the province of Manitoba in Canada. Every first grade classroom had it there. In Ireland, they're researching it. They did some in Australia and several different states. We were part of that through the Safe Schools Healthy Students Grant, which was unrelated to PAX in that. So PAX is the only one that can say several people have researched it who are unconnected and have come up with the same results. So they can be, they're the only ones, one of the only ones that can say we are truly research-based as a package. So really, like, why wouldn't you want to do that instead of create all your own stuff? It's all there right for you. Packaged, you got materials and the whole work. So it's a great tool. Another way you can look at it is that PBIS is a framework, we keep saying. So I created this little house. Okay, so this is a frame. And all the red stuff there are the requirements for PBIS as we know it in Ohio. Okay, so it's our framework. Well, PAX is a tool that you can use to fill in that framework. So all this blue are parts of PAX that can help you achieve that particular requirement in PBIS. It's a tool to help you build that framework. However, you don't want to be that pig. By that pig, I mean, you remember the three little pigs who built their house, the one on the sand, and then the one built his house of wood, but he didn't build it strong enough so it could huff and puff the wolf, and he blew it down, all right? So if you think that PAX is going to be your PBIS, and that's all you're doing for PBIS, you're going to be this pig, and your PBIS framework is going to fall down, because PAX, even though it looks in this thing, there are parts of it that help with parts of this. It does not do all of what PBIS requires. So I want to make sure I make that clear, and I'll show you that as we go along. But it is a tool so that you could do what Ohio PBIS requires in a trauma-informed way, both for the students and the staff, okay? So as we look at this, PBIS gets adults all on the same page. It gets systems in place to make sure that behaviors are clearly identified and taught, positively acknowledged, appropriately corrected, that we make data-informed decisions, and continuous improvement on it, okay? So PAX is a tool. PAX is a tool that helps you teach the behaviors, but it helps you teach it in a trauma-informed way, and in a way that the kids are actually taking it to heart. They're not just memorizing rules, but they're learning why it's important so that they can transfer those behavioral skills to completely other situations. They won't need a matrix with them to help define their behavior, because PAX is helping them learn how to think for themselves how they're going to better the world in a situation. They won't need a matrix anymore, because you're teaching them how to use their own brains. It actually develops their brain, their frontal cortex, to make those types of decisions. So it's a practical tool to take some of the stuff required here, do it in a trauma-informed way, and do it beyond what PBIS does, because not only are you teaching them the requirements of the school, but you're teaching them in a way that the kids can take it further along with them in life. So why is PAX being trauma-informed so important in all of this? I kind of talked a lot about that with the teachers and what I observed. One of the big things about trauma is it shuts people's minds down. So if our bodies are created to, when we see danger, a bunch of biochemical reactions go on, then we fight, flight, or freeze, and then we get away from that danger, and then we have this homeostasis, or we can even call it PAX, because PAX is not an acronym, it's the word for peace, Latin word for peace. So our bodies are meant to mostly live here in peace and calm. But what happens when there's too much stress and or trauma, we're stuck in this little loop here, and this biochemical reaction stuff literally, physically, not only emotionally, but physically starts to destroy our body, okay? So for instance, here you have two different brains. This is a brain of a healthy child, and you could see it's pretty filled in and all the frontal cortex and all that stuff. This is a brain of the same age child, but a child who was brought up in an orphanage in Romania, did not receive social emotional support, a lot of trauma, and the brain literally has holes in it. I once saw, our son was actually at a treatment center at one point, and then they were showing us the brains of some of the people there who were before and then after some treatment, whose brains literally filled in, healed. So remember that this biochemical thing, it's a physical thing that destroys parts of our brain, but the flip side of it is that brain can heal. Not totally all the time, but there is some healing that can happen. Okay, so this is a good way to think about the effects of trauma. Okay, so think of students. Think of a student who's hypersensitive to even a minor threat. Okay, here's a bang, stop doing that, blah, 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 blah. Extremist thinking, someone, you know, what would a kids have extremist thinking about? You hate me because you didn't do this and this, so automatically you hate them. Respond to many things as a threat, life, and as to a threat to life, aggression and impulsive control. Okay, your neighbor steals your pencil and you act as if they're going to kill you, and so you have this whole big meltdown. Another response is attention to a threat while ignoring less threatening but important information. So for instance, because of that pencil, you're responding to that threat of the pencil being stolen, but you're not listening to any of the instructions and you can't even think. So these are all ways that trauma alters the brain, physically and emotionally, okay? Now think about it in terms of adults. Like when you're going to your schools and these teachers or principals or whatnot are not responding to your wonderful PBIS training, let's look at some of these things. Hypersensitivity to even a minor threat. Don't you dare bring one more thing on my plate, okay? Extremist thinking. Now the ODE wants to control everything. Responding to a threat as if it's life or death. Attention to the threat while ignoring less threatening but important details. I see this one in training all the time. They're so worked up over someone telling them what to do or all the work that they have to do that they're not even seeing the things that actually would help them, okay? So it's important to see not just the students, but ourselves in these things too when we're training. And this is where Pax comes in, because Pax is designed to speak to human beings in this way, not just to students, but we can use Pax at every level of human beings if we think of these trauma-informed principles, okay? I don't know how many of you are familiar with ACEs, but what it means to be trauma-informed is understanding the effects of ACEs and knowing that when you're trauma-informed, you can not only diminish the effects of those ACEs, but you can actually prevent some of the negative effects of them even happening to begin with. So, and that's what being trauma-informed is, realizing that, responding with practices, and seek to actively resist re-traumatization. You can see that one being a big PBIS thing, right? We've learned many times for PBIS, we state how reacting violently or to punishment for its own sake and shaming is really just making things worse. A lot of times what we're doing is re-traumatizing students and making things worse, getting their brains to shut down all the more, okay? So what are ACEs? ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. How many of you are familiar with this? Basically, what this started as is some researchers in San Diego. They had about 17,000 people, and they looked at their ACE score. They had 10 different questions they asked. Questions like, before the age 18, were you sexually abused? Before the age 18, was there substance abuse in your house? Was there mental illness in your house? Did you lose a parent? So they had 10 questions, which we call adverse childhood experiences. And then they had these people fill out how many of those ACEs that they had, adverse childhood experiences. What they found is that there was a direct correlation between the number of adverse childhood experiences and your risk not only for emotional health, poor health, but biological health. So your risk of diabetes, your risk of heart condition, your risk of cancer, all those things increased for every adverse childhood experience you had, to the point that if you had 6 or more adverse childhood experiences, you were likely to die 20 years earlier than normal, okay? So that was really a pretty profound research indicating how these things affect you, not only in your childhood, but in your adulthood. So what does that have to do with anything? First of all, if you want to find out more information, you can go, if you actually, even if you just Google ACEs primer, paper tigers, there's a 4-minute video that does an excellent job of explaining all of that and is really a good thing to show teachers, 4-minute video. I was going to do it with this thing now, but it would take too much time that we aren't able to. But I think you understand the concept that those ACEs really, really affect people, kids, adults, everybody. So, okay, that's good. Well, what do we do with that? Where's the hope? Love is all you need. I think we've tried that. Most teachers love their kids dearly, but it isn't all that the kids need. They need skills. They need trauma-informed practices. They need teachers who are going to do more than just love. And the research shows that there's 6 key things, or there's four things to think about when you're trauma-informed. The first 2 you'll notice when they pop up on the screen, probably most of us are familiar with. We pretty much know that trauma is a big deal in a lot of our people's lives. And we also know that there are certain signs that we can recognize. But when the bottom 2 pop up, I think that's where we have not really gone yet in our society. And if PBIS is done well, then I think that trauma-informed care just like amplifies immensely. So the first thing is realizing the widespread impact, and then recognizing the signs and symptoms of trauma. Okay, those are pretty easy things to do, but that alone is not going to help kids. What will help and bring hope is integrating the knowledge about trauma into policies. Excuse me, my throat's dying. Into policies, procedures, and practices, and seeking to actively resist re-traumatization. Policies, procedures, and practices, that's why PBIS exists, okay? Resist re-traumatization, that's what happens when you're trauma-informed. So Pax brings a lot of this in, PBIS brings this in, so here's a pretty key factor of why you want to combine the 2. So was trauma-informed care, so what do I do? Trauma-informed care brings in these 6 aspects: safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural and historical gender issues. And I have a little graphic here that I'm going to be using from now on, which lists those 6 things. So when you see this, you automatically know that it's the trauma-informed, these 6 things. So if you're looking at some teachers who, now I got to do Pax, now I got to do PBIS, this team's in a dark room and they've been putting this all together, and suddenly they come out and telling us what this matrix is and what are this and what are we, how are we supposed to do this? Okay, think about this. Is that approach giving people this feeling? Okay. A lot of times we can do PBIS in exactly the opposite way of this. It's like a few people making choices, coming down on everybody else. They're not intending to traumatize, but if you think about how many things teachers are being told to do in schools, there's a book that I've read recently, or am reading, and it says teachers aren't burned out, they're demoralized. Burnout is one thing, but that's not necessarily what teachers are. And so we say, oh, you know, take some more time for yourself, drink a glass of wine. Teachers don't need that. They're demoralized. They feel like they have no voice choice. They don't have any of that anymore. And so what they need is this more than they need a glass of wine and a massage. So again, this tool analogy here, PAX is a trauma-informed way to do PBIS with both students and staff. Okay, any questions? All right, so this brings us to PAX. Okay, PAX gives teachers evidence-based, trauma-informed skills and strategies to teach students self-regulation, focus, and social skills. Notice it doesn't say anything about behavior there, which is ironic because it's called PAX, the Good Behavior Game, and there's a whole history and story behind that. But it's evidence-based. There's a bunch of stuff up here, and if you're interested in more information, I can definitely give you information on who's done research and whatnot. Trauma-informed, which we talked about. So it's strategies given to the teachers. So these are things that we want our students to do through PBIS. Here's a package for you to do all of that. These are the different aspects of PAX. There is the key foundations, and there's Pax Vision, Leader. These are what we call kernels, the strategies in PAX. Put a little graph together so you can understand it. Really, what PAX comes down to is the vision. If you could teach the kids to think for themselves what they need to do, and the PAX motto is, I better myself, I better my world, I'm a PAX leader. So how do you get them to know how to better themselves, better their world? Well, you start out by doing this Pax Vision process where you have a conversation with the whole class. Instead of making a list of rules, we're going to say, okay, so what are we going to do? See here if you'll do more of in our classroom to make things better, and what are we going to do less of in our classroom so that things are better? And that's Pax Visioning. And then before every little situation transition, you take this stuff that you wrote up on the wall and you apply it to that situation. You have the kids predict how they're going to walk to the cafeteria. They predict using what they're going to do more of and less of. And then you monitor, encourage them. And then when they get to the cafeteria, you have them reflect. Hey, so how did we do? So that it sinks in. So that's really the essence of what PAX is all about, right there. Now, if you wanted to put, this is pretty small, but it says you can put your PBIS expectations in there. So if it's safe, responsible, whatever it is, basically you could use this vision to say, how are we going to be respectful? What are we going to see more of, and what are we going to be less of to be respectful? What are we going to see more of, and what are we going to see less of to be safe? So that's what this is all about. These are all the kernels, the tools that are all listed here. They're all designed for the teacher to help the kids learn this right there, okay? For instance, the harmonica, which has made PAX famous. Okay, you blow the harmonica. You've taught the kids that when they hear the harmonica, they immediately need to stop what they're doing, stop talking, put their eyes on the teacher or whoever's speaking. Then say, hey, thank you for bettering my world. You have just learned respect. You have shown me a lot of respect by stopping what you're doing immediately and putting your eyes on me. So if that was a PBIS, expectation, then you just incorporate it right into that. PAX voices. It's 0 inch, 3 inch, 10 inch. So you teach the kids, okay, at 0 inches, I should not be able to understand what you're saying. At 3 inches, only the people who are 3 inches from you should be able to understand what you're saying. At 3 feet, only people 3 feet from you should be able to understand what you're saying. So those are established things that we call Pax voices, and you teach them to the kids and they practice it. So that's just a way for them to learn how to do this. So we're going to go to the cafeteria. When you're sitting at the table, to better the world, better ourselves, how can we show respect to everybody at the table? What voice level are we going to use to show respect to better our world and better ourselves? And they might say 3 inch because they're going to think you want to go make them be really quiet. I'm like, no, you know, I think 3 inch. What do you think about 3 foot voice? And have that conversation with them so they can learn to think for themselves how they're going to do this, how they're going to do their PBIS expectations in the cafeteria in a social, emotionally conscientious way. So all of these things are designed to do that. Okay, so PBIS requires positive reinforcements, and that's what this little thing is about, wacky prizes. So Pax has this whole thing involved that when you want to acknowledge Pax that you saw more of things, more of the stuff that we wanted to better our world, stop everything, do a wacky prize. And most of them are movement oriented, so they get their blood flowing, it's a brain break, it's a social activity because, and they're like 30 seconds, so they're super fast. Kids laugh together. When kids laugh together and you laugh as a class, it kind of brings your community together. Tons and tons of things are happening biologically in the brain too, to positively acknowledge Pax that you saw. Okay, so that's helping kids do this because they're being noticed when we better our world. Or I saw you respecting Mr. So-and-so, blah, 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 when you said this. So let's do a wacky prize to celebrate that. So you got that PBIS connection because you're acknowledging a PBIS expectation and showing that they bettered their world by doing it, and you're reinforcing that positive behavior, and wacky prizes are free. You don't have to go to Big Lots or Dollar Store and buy anything. And like I said, most of them are action oriented. I could go on forever and tell you the science behind wacky prizes. It's truly amazing what they do. Do not underestimate the power of that. A lot of biological stuff going on in the brain too. Toodles are basically notes to acknowledge the Pax that you saw. Again, positive acknowledgement needed in PBIS. And then you teach the kids to look for positive things other people are doing. So in PBIS, you're teaching them to develop community by looking for stuff. Like maybe it's like today, we're going to spy on each other for respect. See how people have bettered their world through respect. So by the end of the day, I want you to find someone who did something respectful, and we're going to write them a toodle note. Okay, so that's how you could use it with your PBIS. Okay, not okay, basically thumbs up, thumbs down, and then they have these cue cards. It's just a way to positively acknowledge when things are going well, and not okay means, you need to correct yourself, and as soon as they correct themselves, you give them the thumbs up, okay card. And then there's all the stuff that goes into all of these things. I think those are just some examples to tell you how that all works together. All of these things give kids social emotional skills, focus skills, self-regulation skills, so that eventually they can play the good behavior game, which the good behavior game, for those of you who are not familiar, is basically the kids learn to, you talk like we're going to do a math paper, okay? And at this time, I want everybody to do their own work. So let's do a predict. Okay, what kind of voice should we use if everybody's going to do their own work? And then the kids probably say 0-inch voice. Okay, what should our Pax hands and feet be doing? And then you talk about that. Basically, you send out the regulations for what they should do during that thing. Then you set the timer, and then the kids do that. And then at the end of however the time is, then the kids who, the groups, the teams that have 3 spleens or less, 3 off-task behaviors or less, get to play a wacky prize. So basically what happens here is they learn to stay focused on task longer and longer and longer through a series of things that we do. So what it amounts to is that the research is showing that first grade classrooms can remain focused and on task for 45 minutes, 3 times a day in May, okay? 45 minutes a day in May, you can have your kids completely focused on what they need to be doing. It's either like reading or group work or whatever it is. Okay, is that not PBIS data that you would want? And there's ways to get that. Is that not what we're looking for in PBIS? And that includes interacting with each other social emotionally as well. Okay, so how do we learn to infuse all of this together? I think it's first really important that everybody understands that PBIS is a continuous database decision-making process and a framework for school-wide systems, because quite frankly, I don't think a lot of people understand that. They think it's a matrix and a store and tickets and a chart on when they can say 1, 2, 3, you're out of here, go to the principal's office. And I think that's all over our state, because when I do PAX trainings all over the state, I get the same comments about PBIS. So I think the really important thing for us to teach is that PBIS is really no different than what we do every single day as educators for academics. Every single time what we're doing academics with our students, we think, okay, who are our students? How do I meet their needs? I need to get a tool to best serve the needs that I just found out about my students. What's the best tools I can use? Then I get that tool and I create a lesson plan, how I'm going to use that tool. I plan it before I walk into the classroom. Then when the kids come, I use the tools, I use the curriculum or whatever to teach the concepts I want, and then I let them practice while I'm there to offer help, encouragement. And then we do some assessment, maybe a test or a quiz or a project to see if this tool actually helped them learn what you were looking for. And then after you've assessed them, you look at their scores and you say, what are some more needs that they have? What adjustments do I need to make with my tool? And what adjustments am I going to make with my tool, or do I need a new tool? And then you're going to take that, create lesson plans, try the new, and this goes round and around and around. And that's basically what education is all about, right? So think about that. So in education, a tool we often use is a curriculum. This is a curriculum that I got from McGraw-Hill. It's some sort of reading, or I think it's a reading curriculum for high school. I just put this as a thing. So for instance, if you're a teacher, you're going through this academic process, you need a tool to help you teach literature. So you go and you find out that they've got this really cool curriculum that you can use. And so then you look at the curriculum, decide how you're going to use it, lesson plan, then you use the curriculum, you help the students talk about it. Then you have tests and quizzes that this curriculum offers. And then you assess and see what else you need, and then you just keep going on and on. So that's, something that educators can really relate to. The reason why that's important to bring that up, because that's really the same thing that PBIS is doing for social, emotional, and behavior skills. If they could see the simplicity of that, I think it would really help bring a lot of stress down. And then they understand that what we're trying to do is what kind of tools are going to best be used to meet the needs of our students. We have assessed that these are their social, emotional, and behavioral skill needs that we need to address. We need to find a tool. Then when we get that tool, we need to figure out how we're going to implement it school-wide. And then we're going to use the tool, then we're going to implement. And then if we're implement, we're going to collect some data to see if it works. And then we're going to make adjustments when we see if it works or doesn't work, okay? So one of the things you can use, it's not going to do everything for you, is PAX in this process. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions? I'm looking at you, Brandy. Okay, so to make it more complicated, basically what a lot of our PBIS materials does is, not make it more complicated actually, it's just using a different visual, is this whole OIP, the Ohio Improvement Process. Some of you might be familiar with that or not. A lot of schools are familiar with it. Basically, if your school needs to improve academically, then the state says, here's an Ohio Improvement Process. So they use this pretty little circle that says you need to identify your needs, get a research-based, evidence-based strategy, plan how you're going to use that strategy, implement and monitor it, then look at your data to see what works, and then look at the critical needs that we still need to address and get another strategy or adjust the strategy or maybe strengthen the strategy, plan how we're going to do it. So does that look familiar? Same exact thing that we do with teaching every single day, but we're doing it school-wide with the Ohio Improvement Process. We're getting, and there's teams, you have the teacher-based teams, you have school level being, you have building level teams, you have district level teams, because it's a whole school-wide approach to improving academics through this process, okay? So one of the research tools that you can use in PBIS, you're using this same process, but now you're using it for social, emotional, and behavior improvements. And it's school-wide instead of just in your classroom. So maybe you want to pick Pax school-wide to use for that. Okay, so that's really a way to transition your teachers into thinking about what's going on here, is talk to them about what they already know, and then show them how it's the same process that we do for academics school-wide, we're going to do for behavior, social, emotional things school-wide. And PAX is one of the tools that's a researched, evidence-based strategy that they can use. Okay, so now what's the process of how to do, like for a lot of you, I understand, are trainers, what can we do to get this moving? So here are our 9 requirements for PBIS. And what I'm going to do is just walk through these 9 requirements and show how you could do them in both the training and in PBIS in daily life. This is explained in that same document I showed earlier. This is my background and rationale, and then I take every module, the introduction module, module 1, 2, 3, and I talk about how I'm going to use PAX in that module when I'm training, assuming that my schools are wanting to use PAX in their PBIS or they're interested in that. So this is not meant to replace the ODE's PBIS training. This is when the schools are interested in PAX, helping them get to a point where they can go right from the beginning using PAX instead of trying to stick it in somewhere later. So again, this is only if you're and the schools are like, okay, PAX is what we want to focus on when we're doing PBIS. I have some trainings where I have a combination of both. And so then I say, okay, so this is what needs to be done. This is how you do it. Here's some examples. If you're a PAX school, this is how you can do it. I have a couple trainings where they're like not interested in PAX, and then I don't include anything PAX in there at all. So just make sure you know your audience when you're using some of this stuff. Okay, so the first part, administrative commitment and consistent involvement. Usually I'm pretty involved with the administrators before I get this started and know if they want to use PAX or not, or if it's a conversation in their school or not, just to kind of get an idea of where they're at. But honestly, this is one part that PAX has nothing to do with it, because your administrator is going to be on board or not, and there's nothing PAX can do to make an administrator on board. That's just, you know, this is a perfect example of how your house is going to blow down, and PAX isn't going to help you do anything to help with that if you don't have this outside of PAX. Is your administrator involved? Then establishing team-based structures, okay? As I kind of alluded to before, what I was seeing is that I literally had people say, the PBIS team saying, the teachers hate us. We get yelled at all the time. They hate PBIS, they hate us. I'm like, this is not good. And I could sit there and get mad at the teachers, but then again, I'm thinking about this whole trauma-informed thing. These teachers are shut down because something's going on. So how can we form teams in a trauma-informed way? What tool are we going to use? So what I've been doing in our 4-county region is one of the first things I'm doing is Trustworthiness and Transparency. I am teaching the introduction module to the entire school adult population. So, and sometimes they break it up, like in Wasion, I think we broke it up in 2 or 3 different groups. So sometimes it's just the elementary, then the junior high, then the high school. Some of the smaller schools have K through 12, preschool through 12 in the same room. It can be done in different ways. But nonetheless, every adult, every bus driver, every cafeteria staff, every aide here's the introduction module to PBIS. If they're a Pax school, then I have some incorporation of Pax in there, kind of like what I'm doing with you. This way, then there's a trustworthiness built up because the whole school knows what PBIS is before it even gets started. So when they're asked for their input and voice and choice as part of a trauma-informed thing, they know what they're being asked. Because if 6 people of the whole building is creating this matrix, and then they come to the staff and they say, hey, what do you think of our matrix? And the staff says, well, what the heck is a matrix? What do I know? You guys got it all figured out anyways. I don't want to say anything. That has happened a lot. But if they all know what PBIS is, the whole process from the beginning till its ongoing continuation, then when your team comes and says, hey, can we get your input on the matrix? They're like, oh yeah, the matrix. Yeah, I'm going to be stuck with that. So I want my input on that. So, so that is one of the reasons. And every time I bring this up to administrator, they're all over it. And part of this thing is too, that part of PBIS is we're supposed to have professional development for the entire building in the PBIS structure. So this is kind of like double duty there. Not only am I trying to be trauma informed with the whole school, but you're supposed to teach them all about PBIS anyway. So this kind of does it right there for them before the team's even picked. So we do this. And then to be going back to our establishing team-based structures in a trauma-informed way, ideally after this training, then I give the entire school body, all the adults, the option. To get PBIS started, you have 2 options. Door number 1, you could be on the district PBIS team and be part of the development of the 3 to 5 expectations, the matrix, the flow chart for when things go wrong and blah, 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 blah. Because everybody was at this introduction training, they all know what I'm talking about. Or, and so you can be on the team and be part of that, okay? So that way you can have your say, you can be part of that decision making. That's door number 2, actually, sorry. Door number 1 is you could not be on the PBIS team, and that's fine. No one's going to threaten you for that. But just know that even though they're going to ask for your opinion, there's going to be a group of people who are ultimately going to make decisions that are going to affect you. And so if you're not on the team, then you just have to be able to trust them and go along with whatever they decided. So nobody's hand selecting a team behind somebody else's back, which is not very trauma informed, but everybody gets the opportunity to be on the team. It's kind of interesting. One school I did this at, she asked for volunteers on the PBIS team. Not one person volunteered. About a month later, I did the introduction to the whole school. By the end of the day, she had 8 people volunteer to be on the team because they knew that they were getting into, and they're like, I want to be a part of that because I know it's going to affect me and I want to have some say in it, is really what happened. So it was really cool. That being said, I've also had some administrators say, don't give the whole staff options. I'm going to pick my own team because I know there's some people out there who they want to be on the team so that they can raise hell. And so I'm like, yeah, I know who you're talking about, and it's probably a good idea. So they're going to handpick their team, and we're not going to offer it to the whole school body, which kind of contradicts what I just said, but there are situations where that's the wiser way to go. But then what's important is if there is a hand-selected team, that that team is introduced to the whole staff, and that there's trustworthiness and transparency in what that team does right from the beginning, so that the whole school knows who they are, how they're able to communicate with them, and so forth. And then you create your teams. As we know in our PBIS structure, that needs to be done. So where does Pax fit into this? Whoever's on the team, make sure that you have strong Pax representation on the team so that they can help build the principles of Pax into the whole thing. That's really important. They need somebody who understands Pax needs to be on those teams. Okay. The next thing, how do you build a consensus of 3 to 5 behavioral expectations? Okay. Ideally, before we make our 3 to 5 expectations, we're identifying the critical needs of what's going on at our school through data. And that can be done through PBISapps.org, or there's some Pax app stuff. Get hard data to make that decision. Not everybody uses data to make that decision. A lot of times, the 3 to 5 is created before they even know they're supposed to use data in their school. But ideally, if you can make it using some data, that would be great. Where are our needs in the school, and what are our expectations going to be based on those needs? But then you'll kind of want to be trauma informed about this too, because this is going to affect everybody. 3 to 5 words is going to have a huge impact on every human being in the building. So what can we do to get voice and choice, empowerment, peer support, trustworthiness, transparency, all this stuff going to get those 3 to 5 expectations created? And this is where you can use Pax as a trauma-informed tool for the staff. Now you could do this with the students as well, but I'll just show you what we did with the staff. We're going to take this whole idea of we better our world, we better ourselves, and do some predicting. So the staff is going to predict what they want more of to better their school and what they want less of to make their school a better place. So we use the tools of Pax Vision. If you're familiar with Pax, you've seen this before. It's just a paper version to do the vision. And I've adultified it right here, made it a little more adult friendly. So basically I said, because it would make a bad day at school, what do you want to see less of from yourself, your students, and the other staff? Because it would make a bad day at school, what do you want to hear less of from yourself, others, the staff? And then the same thing, see, hear, feel, do more of. Because it would make a great day at school, what do you want to see, hear, feel, do more of? So every individual fills this out. So they all have their voice in it. And through a process, which I can explain another time if you're interested, I get them all to consolidate everybody's words. So not like, okay, so you said safe and I wanted feel safety in the hallways or whatever. So even if the words sort of mean the same thing, both words need to be on there so every adult feels like their voice was heard. So if 15 people said they wanted no running in the hallway, then you put 15 tallies by less running in the hallway. So then we know the weight of how important that is to the staff, if that makes sense. So through this little process that I do, and it gets them conversing with each other, basically we consolidate everybody's see, hear, feel, do more chart on some paper that everybody could see. It hangs in the staff room. I call that soft data. The hard data are numbers and statistics that you can make decisions on. Soft data is more stuff that you can't really prove. It's more feeling oriented, opinion oriented, but it's still data. So we're going to use the vision process as soft data to help create 3 to 5 expectations. I'm going to tell you one of my favorite PBIS stories here. The tale of the blackbirds, I like to call it. So at Pettisville schools, we did the see here, feel, do, more of, and less of. So the whole staff did this. We consolidated it into these pretty charts, got everybody's opinion, and then they sat down and they tried to come up with their 3 to 5 expectations. Well, in the videos and in the training, they saw all these fancy doodaddy things that, you know, were acronyms or catchy little phrases. So they got stuck on being catchy, and they wanted to be, they're called the Pettisville Blackbirds, and they love to say blackbirds soar. So they were so stuck on making an acronym out of SOAR, S-O-A-R, that they were just trying to make up words for their expectations so that they could get that acronym. And they were really stuck in a net, I called it. And then if you look at this, they have respect on 2 different things. So they obviously weren't thinking too carefully. And then own your stuff. And I said to them, really, like, use these are 3 to 5 expectations that are going to guide every person in your building. So say each one of these to yourself, to each other. So I had them say, stay safe. Well, that felt pretty decent. Hey, stay safe. How can you stay safe right now? Own your stuff. Hey, own your stuff. Are you owning your stuff right now? And they did not like the feel of that at all. They felt like they were like, own your stuff. And they did not feel like that was truly representative of who they were. So then they got really stuck. So what do we do with O? So I said, okay, do you really have to be on the bandwagon of the safe, respects, responsibility, or some sort of acronym like everybody else in Ohio's been doing? That's fine if that's where you're going and that's what your school wants. But you're obviously not feeling like this is what your school is. Okay? You're just blindly trying to do something because you have an idea. So I said, your staff did this vision, and you haven't even looked at it to come up with the guiding words that were going to be your vision statement for your whole building. You haven't even looked at this. So I encourage them to set aside the 3 to 5 expectation idea and just study these words that the teachers had done. And this is the words that they had. 3-inch voice, fun activities, leadership, respectful behavior, kind acts, serving, communication, affirming, helping each other, supported, encouraged, confidence, safe, love, energy, affirmed, cared for, teamwork, cooperation, smiles, kind actions, self-monitoring, curriculum connection with counselor, consistency, good manners, encouragement, laughter, collaborative discussions, positive communications, compliments. And I said, okay, that's what your staff said in their see, hear, feel, do activity. And you came up with this. And they looked at this and they're like, ugh, doesn't represent that at all. So, and this is where this story just comes, I think it's so cool. So once they really looked at these words and got rid of trying to make an acronym, this is what they came up with. They looked at the words, they took that soft data using their Pax Vision as a tool, and this is what they came up with. Okay, so now we are Blackbirds. We care for others, we care for our school, we care for ourselves, and they wanted it surrounded by a globe because they knew that they were notoriously known as this little district that was full of themselves and thought they were the only people in the world. So they wanted to change that, but they didn't necessarily want to make it a big issue and that we care for the world because that wasn't really school-based, but they wanted that represented. So they went from this, looking at their soft data that they use Pax for a tool, to this, okay? Huge difference. And it was really a cool process. It was so neat. The principal was almost crying. It was kind of funny, actually. But yeah, and the staff loved it because they felt themselves represented in it. I don't think they would have felt represented in there. I think they were like, okay, that's just what everybody else is doing. Let's just go. But they really felt represented in here because it came from their words. This is what another school came up with. That's actually almost using the PAX motto. They didn't want to do the leader, though. They wanted the safe thing, which is fine. This school already had PBIS going. Be respectful, be responsible, be safe. But in coaching with some of them, they're like, oh, we feel like that's not really how we like to say things. We want to be more proactive than police oriented. So, and then they all didn't agree on this, but then they're kind of sneaking in the cats can, cats care, cats can, cats will. And so that way it's easier for them to say, instead of saying, be respectful, they can say, hey, cats care. How can you show that you care? And so they're kind of like combining some of the ideas that came with this into these words, which is, you know, because they're a PAX school too. And they're actually, what happened here is they created this stuff before PAX really came in. Then when PAX started coming in, they felt this was more police oriented than vision oriented about what they wanted to be. So they're trying to change the wording a little bit there. Okay. I want you to think about this. I'm going to open this up to questions now because I think this is a good question. In this process about our blackbirds going from this to this, would anybody like to talk about how that could or could not have happened if there wasn't, what was useful about PBIS in there and what was useful about PAX? I'm just going to open it up if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, I think for me, one thing that was very PBIS oriented is that it was database and data driven. I think that that is very important in terms of making sure, I think we spoke before and saying as coaches that we make sure that we're using a trauma-informed approach with teachers. So I think that you use the trauma-informed approach with teachers, but it also incorporated data. It doesn't have to like be one or the other. In terms of PAX, we have these, we're starting with a vision, and I think that's important for me.
Okay. Actually, they don't like to even call it their expectations. They call it their visions, their vision words. Is that, and I have a little document actually in the stuff that Brandy has talking about the difference between saying this is our vision and our expectations. The teachers were feeling like when they were expectations, they had to police the hallway. When it was vision, they felt like they were in it together. And that comes definitely from PAX because that's how PAX views behavior is we're in this together to get rid of what we want less of and do more of what we want more of to make our world better together. And that's very much a PAX philosophy. And that's where that one school with the cats, they had that respect, responsible, whatever it was, the last one. They felt they were policing too much. And the more they learned about PAX, they wanted to make those words softer that say, hey, we can be safe. We will be whatever that was. So it was just less that way. Okay, anybody else? Anybody have questions? I can't be that clear that you have no questions at all. Okay, one of the things that really strikes me about this question, if it wasn't for PBIS, there would have been no discussion on bringing everybody together under a vision or 3 to 5 expectations. If it wasn't for PBIS, everybody would still be in their own little classrooms doing their own little thing. And there wouldn't have been an no one would have ever thought of, hey, let's get together and have a grand vision together. And so PBIS, again, is that framework that makes that happen. And PAX made it happen in a trauma-informed way and got them thinking about what they truly were as a school and what they wanted to be as a school. and got them off of this little tangent of trying to make an acronym, which, by the way, acronyms are not bad, but they were so stuck on the acronym, they weren't even thinking about what they were saying. Okay, so systematic teaching of behavioral expectations. How can we use PAX for that? So a lot of times we just take the same thing once we made it. I'm just going to stick with this one now. I'm not going to use the birds because I had this already before that came up. So we're going to take the, so you could do two things. They took the original vision that the teachers did and looked at it in light of all of the different areas of the school. And or what they another school did is that they once they did this and came up with the 3 to 5 expectations, they did one at a time. They said, okay, in the hallway, teachers and students too, what do we want to see, hear, feel more of in the hallway? What do we want to see, hear, feel less of in the hallway? So then they collected more data that way and then worked on just the hallway part of the matrix. And then they're going to go to the playground. And each time they get to one of these sections, they ask what people want more of and less of across the building and use that data to inform them what they're going to put in here. And using PAX language in here too. So for instance, see more PAX speed walk, hear more 0-inch voices. Yeah, and then you're thinking, okay, so what does PAX hands feet and PAX hands mean? Well, if you, and I have an explanation of this too, if you want to see this document. The thing is that this document is bringing the adults on the same page and it's bringing everybody on the same page, but the teaching of it happens in the teaching of it. So if you're a true PAX school, people will tell me, like a music teacher came into a school once that she hadn't been in. She taught there and then for 10 years she was out and then she came back as a music teacher. In the meantime, they became a PAX school. And she says, all I have to do is say, sit like a PAX leader, and they all just sit perfectly. And I don't even have to tell them what that looks like, because what we're doing is we're teaching the kids that every time they think the word PAX, that means, how am I going to better my world, better myself, for everybody around me? What do I need to do? And so that automatically PAX feet means do what your feet are going to do, make your feet do whatever they're going to do to better their world and better yourself. So that is brought into this matrix. It's a little less specific maybe than some PBIS things would want, which I struggle with too, quite frankly. But you know, if you look at any matrix in the whole world, it's never fully following all the laws. So basically, we're doing a lot of the adult stuff here. Also, to help encourage your teachers see things, we're teaching social skills, we're giving behavior examples, natural context. There's so much stuff going on in all of this. So try to keep reminding your schools that they're doing a lot of social emotional learning here. They're doing a lot of improvement process here. If you go to your OTES standards, so much of the stuff is covered under standards. I can tell you, I can almost go to every single standard and show you how when you are implementing PAX, how it will help you achieve that standard. In fact, I actually have a sheet that does that if you're interested in that. I also have a sheet, every kernel has a sheet, and then I explain the kernel, and then I have specific standards. This is the old OTES though, a specific standard like the harmonica standard 3.1, and I explain how the harmonica helps you achieve standard 3.1 and standard 5.4 or whatever it is. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Okay, so remember these. Okay, now we are trying to figure out how to teach expectations. Really, this predict, monitor, reflect is the same thing as this, but now we're getting the students to do it on a minute-by-minute situation. The students predict what needs to happen when we go to the cafeteria. So let's talk about who's in the cafeteria. Let's assess the needs in the cafeteria. What are we going to do to make it better for the people in the cafeteria? The lady who gives you your food, what could we do to show respect to them in the cafeteria? Okay, so we're looking for techniques that we're going to do, and they're not necessarily evidence-based, and then we're going to make a plan before we go to the cafeteria on how we're going to better their world. So this all 1 through 3 all comes in this predict. And you're getting the students to answer these questions. And then we go to the cafeteria, the teacher monitors, good job, you know, you're really showing respect with that when you said hello to the Mrs. Jones, that really showed a lot of respect to her. You know, that's bettering their world. And then when you get to the cafeteria, say, okay, so we said we were going to do such and such, how did we do? And then that's step number 5, right? Assessing how you did. So you're teaching the kids to think about it. How did I do? So I can make plans for the next time. When I predict what I can do, I can learn from my lessons that we talked about in my reflect. So this is really that same process as all of this, but you're getting the kids to learn to think that way by asking them to predict and them to reflect, and you're doing the monitoring with them. Okay, and you're using the tools of Pax Vision. What do we want to see here if he'll do more of? What do we want to see here do less of? And so again, you're using this process. Now the teacher leads the students. The teacher doesn't tell them what to do. The teacher uses guided questions so that the students can predict or identify what needs to be done. That's a big part of PAX. The same thing with reflecting. The teacher has guided questions to get them to reflect so that they could learn to analyze their own behavior and learn to make adjustments themselves and apply it in different situations. Think about how this is trauma informed. So when you're asking them to predict what they're going to do before the cafeteria, you're empowering them, giving them voice and choice. It's a collaboration. The whole class is involved. They're going to help each other out. You're trustworthy and you're safe. I mean, all these things are happening. You're also dealing with a lot of tier 3 issues, okay? So you got this kid who has no control over anything at home. He's abused, and he comes to school and he says, you can't tell me what to do. You're not my mom, okay? Well, think about it. If you're predicting how you're gonna go to the cafeteria, you can ask Joey, who just told you, who will tell you, you can't tell me what to do. You're not telling him what to do. You're saying, hey, Joey, how can we be safe when we go to the cafeteria? So you've taken down that trauma barrier, made that kid feel safe, asked him for his choice and his voice, and he doesn't even have to think about being defiant because you've taken that barrier down. So again, I can go through all kinds of different situations like that with some of these tier 2 and tier 3 situations you might come up with, how this can prevent a lot of that from happening. So we want to use this whole idea of bettering ourselves, better our world, and then use vision in the scripts, okay? So that's the next part of PBIS that we have to help schools do, is make scripts. So we're going to use Pax Vision in that. So for instance, let's just take the cafeteria. We've kind of been talking about that from our matrix. And then the script. You can't really see it here, but the script guides the teachers into this visioning process. Okay, kids. We better ourselves, we better our worlds. We're going to the cafeteria. Who's in the cafeteria? What's the world like there? How can we better it for them? How can we better it for themselves? So then we ask them. And then, so what are some things we don't want to do? What are things we want less of? What are those called in PBIS? Non-examples, okay? So you're getting the kids to think of examples and non-examples. However, we have to make sure they come up with these because we said as a school, these are the expectations that must happen in the cafeteria. So I've listed those in the script. So if the students don't come up with them, then the teacher is told that they need to guide the students in to come up with these so that they make sure that the pre-mandated ones from our matrix actually hit. And then I give some examples of non-examples of things that we want to see less of. And then I do this through all 3, respect, responsible, safe in this case. And then the script goes on and gives scenarios and that kind of thing and other things that we want our ideal scripts to do. So does that make sense? Okay, and then when we're teaching the behaviors, you have to actually set a time and place for this to actually happen when you're going to teach the behaviors. This is, again, a perfect example of when Pax is not going to help you out, because this is something that the school, the administration has to do. I mean, Pax isn't going to say, hey, at 2 o'clock, blah, blah, blah. This is something your PBIS framework really has to make happen. System for reinforcing behaviors. I've alluded to some of that. Pax is loaded with it. These are all different Pax kernels. And again, if you understand Pax, every one of these things is a reinforcement of desired behavior. It can be used in conjunction with tickets or whatever other things that you use. It's, you know, you probably want to use other things than just this, but these are several things that you can use to reinforce behavior. System for correction of behavior, and this is the one that every teacher wants to be a part of. There's all kinds of things inherently in Pax that we do that are constantly helping kids redirect their behavior and talking about them. The reflect is a constant thing. Predict, monitor, reflect. So those are all examples of that. And then there's a whole other training called Pax Heroes. I don't know how much influence you have in your schools, but if you can ever get them to do the Pax Heroes training, I would do that training over any other training after they've been the initial training. It is the best training ever, and it teaches you how to look at tier 2 and tier 3 situations. Really, really good stuff in that training. I'd do that over the next steps anytime if you know any of the trainings in Pax. It's really good. So then if your system for correcting behaviors, you know, you got your little flow chart, and if this happens, then it goes to the principal. If this happens, it stays in the teacher or the classroom. Most of the time, these flow charts just say, deal with it, but they don't give tools for the teachers to deal with it, and that becomes very frustrating. This is one of the reasons why a lot of teachers don't like PBIS, because they feel like this flow chart just throws them under the bus and says, deal with it. Or it just says 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out. Yay, I finally have 3 strikes, I can send them over here. Neither of that's trauma-informed or helpful. So what we've done with Pax is kind of created a little flow chart here. So are there any Pax Hero strategies I could use? That's your first line of defense when you're before you send to the principal's office. This right here is what's replacing this. Okay, so try that. That didn't. Okay, that worked. Good. That's what you can stand with. But that didn't work. Okay, so let's look at natural consequences. If it works, great. If it didn't work, well, then you're going to go to logical consequences. Blah blah blah, and then it takes you down here. Now, this flow chart doesn't explain all of this. So just like the posters we put in our hallway, they're not teaching behaviors. They're just reminding us of what to do in certain situations. So this is a reminder of what teachers need to do. They need to be trained on what this all means, and Pax Heroes is a big part of that, actually. So again, a teacher can't look at this and just do something, but it gives them the flow, and then they'll be trained in those skills, and that's where your professional development comes in, that the schools have to constantly doing, is teaching their teachers how to do this. Again, I have another document that discusses that all and what each one of those things actually mean. And there's also a big misunderstanding about consequences in Pax. Some people think that there aren't consequences in Pax. I have a document talking about that and how to do this and a whole bunch of other stuff too. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Then database decision making. I actually do that right here as the third module, because I think that they need to be using data for all of this stuff, and if they don't know what that is, then they can't do it. So I often do this one right here. Emily Jordan says do that. That's fine if you want to do that. So what can you use Pax for there? Great stuff in these Pax apps, but can't just use Pax apps, but I'll show you what you can do for what the Pax app does. So we have a thing called spleen counts, where you go into a classroom and you watch the students, and so some other person comes in, you observe the students, or you can do it as a teacher too, but it's harder. For 15 minutes, you just count every off-task behavior, not just bad behavior, but anything that's off-task. So if a kid's going like this, you're counting that behavior, and we call those spleens. They're not bad, they can be bad, but they're just not focused 100% on what we're doing. So you count those. So for 15 minutes, and then you chart it, okay? And the app does this all for you. I mean, well, you have to enter it into the app, but the app charts it for you. So, and then about a month later, you come in again, and you come in again. And what happens, and what, if you're implementing PAX correctly, what the data is from all over the country, from Ireland, from Manitoba, everywhere, shows that if you're implementing PAX correctly, there is a 55 to 75% drop in off-task behavior within months, okay? We're not talking just bad behavior, we're talking anything that is off-task. So within months, if you're implementing PAX correctly, you can show by data that your teachers have your focused kids 55% more of the time than they did here, or whatever. There's been a 55% drop in off-task behaviors. Okay, that's super great data to help teachers, because usually they feel like nothing has changed. I've shown this data to teachers and they're like, oh, my class hasn't changed at all. And I'm like, let me show what you're splitting. You don't remember what they were like at the beginning of the year. They've made a ton of progression. Let me show you the data. So really helpful data to encourage. And this is one of my favorites. If you think of this, blue is PAX minutes. PAX minutes represent the number of minutes they're totally focused during a good behavior game. Whole explanation there, but just think about that. The number of minutes straight in a row that kids are totally focused, like the 45 minutes that the kids were focused in first grade 3 times a day at the end of the year. Okay, think of the orange as the number of spleens or off-task behaviors they're doing within a game. Okay, so they started playing this good behavior game. I don't know if you can see the date here, is in September. They were playing the game for about 1 minute. So basically they were trying to stay on task for 1 minute and get 3 or less spleens. So in September, they were getting like 4, 6 spleens every time they played the game, but they were only playing games for like 1 or 2 minutes, and then it gradually increased. Their game time kept increasing. They gradually, so when they got better and better, the teacher kept increasing the time, kept increasing the time. So it's like they're building the stamina for focus. So by December, at Christmas time, they're playing 12-minute games. This is a first grade classroom in Montpelier. So they're playing 12-minute games. So first grade classroom at Christmas time, focused for 12 minutes straight. Okay, that many minutes straight. And look at, their off-task behaviors have actually reduced. So now there's 2 off-task behaviors for 12 minutes as opposed to 4 to 6 in 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, so that's data right there when you're making database decision things. What's working, what's not. Obviously, this is working. And you can show this to the kids, and this is the fun part. The kids can set goals for how many minutes they want to collect, and there's a little thermometer, so you can get the kids involved with collecting data and setting goals, so they can like chart out that this is how many minutes they have so far. The current game is going to have this minutes if they win. Then they're going to, how many are they going to put on this chart, and then what their current goal is and that kind of thing. Okay, so there's way more going on here than just PAX, right? You got math going on here. You got them thinking about their expectations for PBIS, how they're going to do all this. They're setting goals. Tons and tons of stuff is happening here as a class, setting these goals. And so they want to collect PAX minutes. And if you're using the app, it's really cool because the app, you can show this on your whiteboard and they can see how it all goes, and you can do calculations and everything. It's really, really cool. Mary Jane, I love that dog. That is beautiful. So that's off-task behavior. That was a spleen. I was distracted. And you're wondering, like, why do I have a pink tutu on this picture? Tell you a real life story. So the second grade class in Delta, Ohio has this amazing PAX teacher, and they got off on this goal setting. And so they were setting goals and she let them pick what they got to have when they set goals. So they would like set a goal for 300 minutes of focus, and then they could each bring a stuffed animal to school, okay? Then they found out she had a pink tutu. So, Mrs. Stickley, can you wear your pink tutu? She goes, I'm not going to wear my pink tutu to school. Well, what if we earned enough Pax minutes? So they set a goal of 800 Pax minutes so that they could see her bring her pink tutu to school and put it over her pants at school, okay? So these kids were so obsessed with this goal that they had to be positively reinforced, PBIS, with a pink tutu on their teacher, that they set 800 minutes. So she said it was at the point where they walked into the classroom in the morning and they were all focused, and they left for specials, and then they came back from specials. So she said there weren't any more minutes left in the day for them not to be focused because they wanted so badly to earn 800 minutes. So every minute she had them, they were focused because they were bound and determined to get 800 minutes. So again, great use of data, incentives, and all kinds of things going on there. Sometimes schools do soft competitions between hallways, how many Pax minutes they can earn. I've seen schools put it up on their kiosks so the whole community can see how many Pax minutes they're earning, and if they can earn so many Pax minutes as a whole school, then they get to do some special things. So lots of school-wide things you can do with that too. Tier-wide system of behavioral supports is our next requirement. You're all familiar with this graph, I hope. So as far as Pax is concerned, you can use, Pax is really intended to be a universal application at a tier 1. But there's all kinds of things incidentally you do in a tier 1 situation that actually address tier 2 and tier 3 situations and prevent a lot of them. And then we got Pax Heroes, which helps you identify things in tier 2 and tier 3 situations and give you some very specific strategies for that. So lots of stuff happening all the way up the pyramid here. I will have to say though, so for some serious tier 3 situations, and Pax isn't going to handle, even tier 2, Pax isn't going to handle all of this. So some of these situations need wraparound services and stuff like that that are beyond what we can do in the classroom with Pax, or in the hallway, or in the cafeteria with Pax. So very helpful, but not the be-all and end-all. And then our last requirement is maintaining culturally responsive practices. It is trauma-informed, which by definition is culturally responsive. If you think about it, if we're asking for voice and choice and support and peer collaboration and all that kind of thing from all of the students, we're getting to know all of their needs and different cultural things that happen, different homes that have different things going on, that kind of thing. So those are the 9 requirements and how I help infuse Pax into them. I have some schools that already had PBIS set up, and I'm in the position where I'm able to coach them, and then I just kind of help them weave into their PBIS practices how they can use Pax to bring some of this out. And then I have some situations where they're going cold turkey with everything and everything else in between. So what I have noticed is that if they have PBIS already and then they get Pax, they are realizing that they've been doing more policing with their PBIS and not really teaching and getting kids to be more motivated by self. And so they take those past things and weave it into their framework and make adjustments so that they become less policing and more visionary with what they already have. So lots of different areas that you can go in that. And again, I have that explained in this document and some other documents. And thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, Brandy, you can open it up, or if anybody has questions.
Does anybody have questions? You guys can take yourself off mute. I know that we've had you muted. So if you have any questions, you can take yourself off mute. We will open up a discussion on Edmodo. Laura, I appreciate you because, as I said, each time that I talk to you, we've had a couple of long conversations. I think that one of the biggest takeaways for me, we always, I can't remember, I believe it's in the Tier 2 training. Laura Sheets, you're on there, jump in. You have a quote that says, if PBIS is not happening in the classroom, then you're not doing PBIS. And I think that you have kind of spelled out a way that we can make sure that teachers are equipped, because like you said, it is easy for us to just say, hey, here's your flow chart, make it work. But in order for us to really have a successful PBIS implementation, it's important that we equip teachers with those skills that they can do to kind of help manage some of that behavior that they're seeing in the classroom.
And that's where PAX should be first. It should be in the classroom first and then school-wide. And again, I think of that analogy. You're not going to teach reading in the cafeteria with 200 kids. It has to be done in the classroom. So teaching teachers how to use PAX in the classroom, first and foremost, is so important. And then they can understand how to use it in PBIS in the school-wide perspective. And then you kind of get bang for your buck that way, because they have the skills in the classroom before you're even really worried about outside of the classroom.
Yes. Does anybody else have any questions? Hi, Deb, I see you there. Does anybody else have
Hi, I would just like to add a few things. First of all, Laura, you did a fantastic job on that presentation. As someone back many years ago when I was an administrator in Licking County, the Newark City School District, we were the first to implement the PAXIT program. Again, that's many years ago, 2006. I found it to be incredibly effective. And I agree with you that I feel that PAX is better suited for the classroom, whereas PBIS is building-wide, in my opinion, should start district-wide and then go down to building-wide. But, and then also PAX in the classroom incorporated into the MTSS model. But all of those hand in hand, and you really are covering all aspects of any social, emotional, behavioral concerns that you might come up with. So great job, thank you.
Thank you.
any more questions? I think we've all found that now that we're doing things online, we don't know the wait time when we ask for questions. Like in a physical training, we know to wait a few seconds, a few minutes. So any other questions, comments, thoughts, takeaways?
I'll throw out a comment. Again, Laura, fantastic job putting those two together and showing how that can work. For any of you who are in the process and you're at that process where you're trying to explain things to administrators and create all that buy-in that you're going to need, if in Wood County we have run a youth alcohol, tobacco, and other drug survey. We call it our youth survey. We've included mental health, relationship violence, and several other things in our survey now. This year, for the first time, since we've been doing PAX for a few years, we wanted to see what kind of effect PAX had on student behaviors, risky behaviors specifically. And we weren't quite sure how to ask the question because most of our kids who would have been exposed to PAX for the it was like 4 or 5 years ago. Our survey starts in 5th grade and we run it 5 through 12. So we knew our high school kids wouldn't have a clue what we were talking about. So we simply asked this question, one question. We actually asked two. We threw one of them out because we found out there was a second meaning to the word tootle. I don't know if you've looked that up. Tootle has a different meaning with the high school kids. Anyway, we asked the question, how many of you remember your teacher getting class attention by using a harmonica? That's all we asked them. Based on those results, we were able to do a crosstab which verified in our 5th, 6th, 7th grade. Once after 8th grade, not that many kids would have remembered, or we weren't sure even had PAX. So 5th, 6th, 7th graders, big difference in students who showed mental health problems, alcohol experimentation, tobacco experimentation, drugs in general, better mental health scores on our scale, and less suicide ideation. It was amazing. It was amazing. Now, since it's our first year of asking the question, I have to be careful saying it. And I don't have percentages right here in front of me right now, but it was obvious the kids who remembered their teacher using a harmonica had less risky behavior use, had better mental health, and missed school last the whole bit. It was really good.
And that's really cool because that's a perfect example. Like, I bet you Paxis doesn't even know you did that. And so,
not officially.
yeah.
I did talk to Dennis about it. Unofficially, he doesn't know what our results were, but I did talk to him about it right before we wrote the survey.
Okay. Because that is the kind of thing that I love to hear. When Paxis isn't doing the research, somebody else is doing research and coming up with similar results.
Right.
That's what makes it evidence-based, and I think is super exciting.
Yeah, I was very encouraged by it.
Yeah,
and it's something we can take now back to our administrators to say, hey, look, this is what we're demonstrating. This is what we're showing. If you had any doubt about PBIS and Pax or Pax and PBIS, this is how it's working. This is what it's doing for you, which means you're still getting, of course, you know, I don't have a way of judging academic performance because we don't keep track of that data. But if there was some way we could slip that into their educational achievement data as a screening tool, we could probably find out what that's doing to them as well for academic achievement. But
the national data does show a difference in academic achievement. But yeah, it would be really cool to see what you could find on that too.
Yeah, yeah. The problem I have at our level is you never know what other variables. Was it the new reading curriculum or some other such thing that made this difference, or a math methodology, or who
was
knows
there
what?
A pandemic that year?
Yes. Right.
Very cool.
So, yeah, I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Thank you, Kyle. I would love to talk to you more about that.
Okay.
I was at a Paxis training and they were mentioning somewhere in Northwest Ohio, and I don't know where, because they didn't have full data on that either, so they wouldn't tell us where the location was. But the police department was noticing less calls to the school. So they were asking why, and it was a Pax school, or it was somehow or another, either the police department was asked what the data was, or the police department noticed it, or one of the two. Nonetheless, there were less calls by the police department to the schools.
That's cool. I don't think it was any of ours, but I'm not sure.
And I don't think it was any of mine either, so I don't know how far Northwest Ohio extends.
And that would be good, Laura, to share any of that data that we can add into the folder just to show that it works and how it builds. I think you and we went back and forth and we toggled what words we could use in the title of the program. And we want to continue to say that it strengthens PBIS. It's not that takes the place of, but it just strengthens your implementation and allows. And Laura chimed in and said that quote about PBIS, if it's not happening in the classroom, you're not doing PBIS. That comes from Laura Sheet's favorite person, Kent McIntosh.
Yeah. And it's super important that, you know, and I will be the first to admit, when I first started training Pax, like I was like, oh, if you're doing Pax, you're doing most of PBIS anyways, because generically, I guess from a PBIS perspective, you could say that. And so a lot of people, including myself, were kind of saying that around Ohio. And then the ODE people who were doing PBIS were like pretty upset about that, rightfully so. So there was a big misunderstanding there. And then when I really learned about the specifics, I'm like, oh boy, that is not the case at all. So just be careful you don't insinuate that Pax is going to take care of all of your PBIS woes, because it will not. It's a very useful tool, but it is not going to do all of PBIS.
Perfect. Any other questions, comments? And again, I'm going to, this has been recording, so I'm going to put this up in Edmodo. So if you haven't signed up to join Edmodo, make sure you do. I'll send out another link. And feel free to share resources. And one thing that I am trying to emphasize as an RFC is that you all bring a lot of expertise to the table. You all have a wealth of knowledge. And so I want us to be able to share resources and never have to reinvent the wheel, but I want you all to share things that you've created, because we can all coach each other. We can all learn from each other. So feel free to share anything. If you have any topics, if you want to host one of our virtual PLCs, I want to make sure that that I am tapping into all of your expertise to make sure that we build this Western quadrant of Ohio. So, go ahead, Deb. Go ahead, Deb. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Deb.
No, I was just saying you're doing a great job facilitating all of this.
Thank you, Deb.
Yes, I truly am very impressed, and I
Encouraged.
continue to learn from all of you. And I tell you, doing PBIS, you know, in buildings and districts, and I've worked in other states. It's all very different than in comparison to working at ODE in PBIS. So, but I'm trying to take everything that I, you know, learned from the field over many years to try and assist in whatever way I can, because for me, it's all about improving the culture and climate for these students, but as well for the staff, because I just can sense, especially working directly with districts last year with the Office for Exceptional Children, that these teachers are at their wits' end.
They are.
And my heart goes out to them. I remember being one of those teachers, you know, and you're desperate for any guidance and help you can get. So, yeah.
It really struck me, not this past September, but the beginning of the school year, two beginnings of the school year, between mid-August and mid-September, I counted 20 teachers who were just bawling in front of me, crying.
Oh,
and it wasn't even past mid-September.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Because they wanted to do all these wonderful things, but they just didn't know how it was all going to fit together.
Right.
And they were just overwhelmed. And I think the secondary trauma that they have when they deal with these kiddos is immense and underestimated.
Yes. I agree.
Great job. Okay.
That's why we try to add a little humor whenever we can. If you'll notice behind me is
I saw that, Kyle.
that's our mascot, Mr.
I
Be
saw
Cool.
it.
And just within the last 2 weeks, he became our Mr. COVID Be Cool. He's practicing his social distance and trying to tell the kids we're going to have a whole big sign when we can get back to school that for the schools that tell them Mr. Be Cool says it's cool to wear a mask. It's cool to wash your hands. It's cool to be doing all those social distancing rules, that they don't have to intercede or they can just add that out in the hallway and they don't have to mess around with trying to add it to PBIS rules and things like that. They can just put this up as a supplement.
I have to say kudos to Angie, who works with Kyle, because one of the first PAX presentations I did was with her. She works at Wood County ESC as well. And she made the comment, she goes, I hate it when there's a bunch of tons of paragraphs on a PowerPoint, so I'm going to put a bunch of pictures in this. And she did, and every time I make a PowerPoint, I'm looking for pictures, and I always think of Angie at Wood County ESC there.
That's awesome.
I'll let her know.
Okay. Well, thank you all for attending. As I said, I'm going to, as soon as I end this, I'm going to save it and then I'll upload it. I'm not sure how much Edmodo allows me to upload and how much space I have, but if not, I will put it on a private YouTube page, and then I'll make sure that I upload it for you all and all of the resources as well. So thank you so much, Laura. Thank you all for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day and stay healthy. Stay
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.